In this presentation, you will learn about recommendations for better inclusion. The degree of genuine participation can vary considerably. However, if the perception of participation is genuine, it provides legitimacy to and acceptance of the Constitution. Yet, representational legitimacy also remains a controversial topic, and the question is who has the right to speak on behalf of minorities and particularly religious groups. Most religious groups are typically non-homogeneous, either economically or politically, and their representation is often considered to be deprived from the group's elite. In fact, complications with subgroup power and varying interests have been raised by many marginalized groups, including ethnic minorities, women, LGBTQIA+ people, and many others. These marginalized groups are usually not homogeneous and feature diverse opinions, which makes any change process difficult for the groups to manage. It usually means educating themselves, forming consensus, and establishing minimum common ground and alliances before sensitizing majorities. It is not uncommon for members of marginalized groups to assume that if they were given a seat at the constitution building table, they could and should wear many hats of representation. It is especially true for women, who are often expected to represent all women as well as other marginalized groups, because gender cuts across many marginalized groups and their interests of the party they belong to. This makes their jobs even more challenging. One example is the woman elected to represent both men's and women's interests by a party that uses women to meet quota requirements or other legal requirements without taking a stand on women's issues per se. It is important to mobilize marginalized groups to meaningfully contribute to the constitution building process. In the long term, this will ensure sustainable peace and security as well as the recognition of diverse identities. Positive engagement with majority groups. It is important for minorities and marginalized groups to interact with majorities so that opinions that are stronger role for minorities would undermine majority interest are dispelled. By investing in the education of marginalized groups of their own members on effective consensus building processes, marginalized groups can arrive at minimum common positions and broad internal alliances before engaging with majorities. It simply means that aligning with the majority will help promote minority ideas too. Establishing alliances between marginalized groups and dominant groups, primarily political parties, journalists, and the judiciary, can be achieved through face-to-face relationships, but also through education and training campaigns aimed at sensitizing dominant groups to the needs of the marginalized. In the end, this should be made available to the public. A process such as this begins with aligning the interests of dominant and marginalized groups. In these processes, ensure that marginalized groups have their security concerns respected. A multi-pronged advocacy approach. It is important to adopt a broad approach to advocacy for the rights of marginalized groups. In particular, they need to focus on a robust human rights framework as well as an independent judiciary. To facilitate marginalized groups' participation in the constitution building process, information communication technology or ICT is only one of the many tools available and therefore should not substitute for other approaches such as face-to-face consultations. In ICT-based exchanges, participants' interests need to be emphasized and mapped to representative issues. Listing. Listing specific minority groups under non-discrimination clauses needs careful consideration. Create constitutional frameworks that promote gender equality by adopting gender-sensitive norms. Providing opportunities for women to participate in the constitution building process and to voice their concerns regarding livelihood, security, and in post-conflict settings, safety, security, and effective food security. Members of marginalized groups, in particular women, should be trained and given the confidence to engage in technical issues surrounding constitution writing. People advocating for marginalized groups' rights need to take a broader approach to changes to the Constitution than just focusing on provisions directly related to their interests, such as human rights framework, an independent judiciary, and accountable government in general. Lastly, the decision to strive for inclusion on lists with non-discrimination clauses should be carefully considered, and that further research be undertaken to identify the positive and negative effects of listing marginalized groups. For marginalized groups, this leads to greater benefits than constitutions with strong general human rights protections. Thank you for watching the presentation. Do like, subscribe, share, and leave your comments about this presentation or any other topics you would like to learn more about.